Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Jojo Diaz posted this tweet on the heels of his win over Javier Fortunia. He says, I want Devin next. We'll do everything possible to make that fight happen. And in truth, it shouldn't be hard to make, as both fighters have regularly fought on the DAZN platform. The winner of that fight was set to be the mandatory challenger for Devin Haney's WBC lightweight title. Devin Haney replied to Jojo Diaz's tweet by saying, "We will see, sir," to which Jojo Diaz said, "Don't backpedal. I'm going to talk to the team this weekend, lock that in for this year." To which Devin Haney replied, "It sounds like you're the one backpedaling. You're my mandatory. The fight should be easy to make."
In theory.
We've heard a few rumblings as of late. The potential Jojo Diaz versus Devonte Davis fight, as the Devonte Davis people are said to be interested in fighting Jojo Diaz. I don't know how realistic that proposition is.
But Davis is going to have to fight somebody.
Leonard Ellerby has already made it clear that Devonte Davis is not going to be staying at 140 pounds, at least based on what his promoter said ahead of that Mario Barrios fight. Davis's next fight might not be at 140 pounds, and if it isn't, and he's going to descend to lightweight or even super featherweight, he's going to need a dance partner. I don't imagine his very next fight is going to be against Ryan Garcia. There has been some interest expressed both sides, but Oscar De La Hoya very recently said that he knows the real number for Devonte Davis's pay-per-view. It's not 200,000 the way Mike Coppinger tweeted. He says, based on his sources, it's actually half that.
90,000.
A little less than half. And based on that, he doesn't feel that the Garcia versus Davis fight is ready to be made yet. He wants to marinate it a little while longer, perhaps stage it in the first quarter of next year. So that more or less rules out Ryan Garcia as Devonte Davis's next fight. Teofimo Lopez is all tied up with George Kambosos Jr. Vasil Lomachenko, he just fought Masayoshi Nakatani. The Davis people don't seem any more interested in fighting Vasil Lomachenko now than they did the last 2 years.
We're never interested in that fight.
Everybody knows that. Jojo Diaz seems like a more viable option than either Ryan Garcia, Teofimo Lopez, or Vasil Lomachenko. I am curious as to why no effort has been placed fighting Devin Haney. Devin Haney has a full-fledged world title in the lightweight division. He's not committed at this time to the DAZN platform.
Why aren't we hearing rumors about a Davis versus Haney fight?
Because, if you want to make the fight, if you really want to make the fight, now would be the time to do it, since Devin Haney, he's not committed to any particular platform at this time. What offers have gone out to Devin Haney from Devonte Davis, who's supposed to be the proverbial A-side to everybody between 130 and 140 pounds?
He's the A-side. Where's the offers?
Ultimately, it's up to Joseph Diaz. In some ways, he's in the driver's seat as far as what fight with what fighter he wants to go with, though he has made it clear it's Devin Haney who he's looking at. It's Devin Haney who he is targeting, and there's already a precedence for the match because Jojo is the mandatory challenger to Devin's title. It is an intriguing fight. It's a fight that I've no doubts would take place on the DAZN platform, because even if Devin Haney doesn't have any contractual commitments to DAZN right now, he still has Eddie Hearn in his corner.
And if Eddie makes the fight, then that's where it would be.
I like the idea of Haney versus Diaz because Jojo Diaz, unlike Jorge Linares and Yuriorkis Gamboa, this guy's got more upside, and he's riding high off his latest victory over Javier Fortuna. It's nothing against Jorge Linares or Yuriorkis Gamboa, but it is safe to say that those guys are past their prime and past their best. They don't have all the upside here today that a Jojo Diaz might have, with only one recorded loss to Gary Russell Jr. Jojo Diaz has established himself as a rather solid lightweight by defeating Javier Fortuna. It's a credible scalp for someone like Devin Haney, who needs credible scalps. The focus cannot be on fights that aren't going to happen anytime in the near future, like the Lopez fight, like the Ryan Garcia fight, or even like the Davis fight. None of that stuff is going to happen anytime in the near future.
This can.
This might. And this is more conducive towards the progression of young Devin Haney's career than mincing words with guys he's not going to end up fighting by way of social media. Never mind Teofimo for now. now. Never mind Devonte Davis. Never mind Ryan Garcia.
Get JoJo in the ring.
In other news, very recently, reigning WBC super lightweight champion Chantel Cameron spoke to Boxing Social and said that Katie Taylor won't fight me. WBC super lightweight champion Chantel Cameron doesn't believe ring legend Katie Taylor will ever fight her, despite doing everything to deserve it. And doing everything to deserve it.
Okay.
How exactly do you quantify that when Chantel is one of 4 champions in the super lightweight division? What says that they don't deserve it just as much as she does? Or what says that one of Katie's mandatory challengers don't deserve it, since they are her mandatory challengers?
They have a literal right to challenge her for the titles.
Not figuratively, literally. Every single one of those belts Katie holds comes with a mandatory challenger, and every single one of those mandatory challengers, should they so choose to, has the right to challenge Katie Taylor for her belts.
They do.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not against Chantel Cameron getting that fight. I'm not against Jessica McCaskill getting that fight, or Amanda Serrano, if Amanda wanted it, which I don't think she does. Better still, I'm not against any of these fights happening. But Chantel is one of several girls that believe they have done enough to get the fight.
She is.
She's one of several girls who believe they've done enough that they deserve it.
She is.
So when you have so many girls, so many contenders, so many champions, all saying the same thing, what distinguishes one from the other, one from the rest?
How are you supposed to tell them apart?
This ain't the first time Chantel said this, that she feels like Katie Taylor will never fight her. I've actually had the privilege of speaking to the reigning WBC super lightweight champion myself, and in so many words, she told me the same thing. But from where I'm sitting, I feel like Chantel is closer to that Katie Taylor fight than some other girls, because Matchroom is invested in her, unlike some other girls.
She's a matchroom fighter.
Who's hungry, very hungry, and won't approach the Taylor fight with all of the entitlement issues that, say, Amanda Serrano did when she was offered the fight, signed on to have the fight, then decided to double back, pulled out.
Taylor versus Cameron might be easier to make than Taylor versus Serrano.
Might. It's definitely an in-house fight that can be built. As Chantel Cameron, in her campaign to become the 140-pound division's undisputed champion, sees that happening fight by fight, I could see a Taylor showdown happening somewhere down the line.
Since the Taylor people might have hard feelings with the Serrano people.
Doesn't look like they're going to be challenging undisputed welterweight champion Jessica McCaskill. I actually thought they were going to get the fight, the McCaskill people, and they didn't. Katie's going to be satisfying her mandatory challenger, Jennifer Hahn, but no hard feelings like the hard feelings you see with Team Serrano, and it doesn't look like they're going to be fighting Jessica McCaskill.
Jennifer Hahn fight is a prelude.
Don't misunderstand me. It's definitely a mandatory challenger. It's a mandated title defense, but in many ways it's also a prelude to something bigger. It's not unusual to see Katie Taylor take care of what can only be described as a lighter touch between big fights, between hard fights, between the second Pursoon fight and the Natasha Jonas fight. She took on Miriam Gutierrez. Miriam Gutierrez, who a lot like Jennifer Hahn, can be described as a lighter touch. A mandatory challenger, yes, but a lighter touch. So if we follow the pattern, the Jennifer Hahn fight could very well be a prelude to something bigger. A bigger fight with a better fighter, maybe a Chantel Cameron.
You never know, I wouldn't rule it out.
In other news, on August 28th, David Benavidez is going to be taking on former IBF champion Jose Uzcategui. This was part of Showtime's big schedule they rolled out several weeks ago. And I'm going to be honest here, I feel like David is better than this fight. I feel like this fight doesn't offer him very much. What does he gain from beating Jose Uzcategui that he didn't already gain beating Romer Angulo and Ronald Gavril? Hell, he probably gained more fighting Ronald Gavril than he's going to gain fighting Jose Uzcategui. Essentially, the feeling I get when I think about this matchup is that David should have been placed in something bigger should have happened right now, and it's probably not his fault because he's been vigorously calling out Jermall Charlo. Per a tweet from Michael Benson, David Benavidez has said he'd be willing to try and come down to middleweight, 160 pounds, to challenge Jermall for his WBC title this year.
Well, that's a bigger fight than this one is. No telling if that's going to happen.
Even if David Benavidez is willing to concede the 8 pounds it takes to make the middleweight limit, to come down for a Jermall Charlo fight. Who knows if Jermall Charlo will be any more receptive to that fight then than he's been so far. Even stranger is that Jermall Charlo is the one that got the ball rolling for this entire conversation, saying that he'd knocked David Benavidez out upon his ascent to the super middleweight division last year. He started all of this.
Everybody conveniently forgets that.
I mean, I look at this fight, compare it to what David Benavidez has done so far. 2 fights with Ronald Gavril, a fight with then reigning WBC champion Anthony Durrell, Romer Angulo, Ronald Ellis,
And now Jose Uzcategui.
who is coming off of 2 consecutive victories since having lost to Lionel Thompson in 2019. Jose has looked less than perfect, less than spectacular, fight by fight.
Quality of competition has been less than spectacular.
Looking at this fight and looking at David's last 1 or 2 fights, you get the sense that he's lacking a bit of direction as far as what's next. The only hope now for a big fight is to either cut the 8 pounds and concede that to make the middleweight limit, see about getting a Jermall Charlo fight, or maybe, if things don't work out between Caleb and Canelo, maybe David Benavidez can get that fight. Maybe he can get that Caleb Plant fight, who's on his same side of the street. Shouldn't be hard to make.
In theory.
I mean, I've been telling you guys for weeks, I've been telling you guys for months, that I'm not sure if that undisputed super middleweight title fight is going to happen between Caleb and Canelo, because in all likelihood, what the PBC wants to do is walk Canelo into a multi-fight deal. And you know, just based on how he feels about that, and based on how he feels about dealing with the pay-per-view platform as opposed to the guaranteed cash he gets from DAZN, well, there's a possibility that fight don't happen. And if it don't happen, then maybe David can get a fight with Caleb.
Maybe.
Because if you look at what they've had him doing so far, in unison with their island policy, that, you know, the super middleweight division is not limited to the PBC stable of fighters. There are other fighters out there that are with other outfits that would make for great and interesting fights for David. But because of the PBC's island policy, and because of who he has been fighting so far, fight by fight, you kind of get the sense that they've been wasting his time. And it's about time for something bigger and better to happen.
I think it's about time he's in a big fight.
And it's not likely that the PBC would let him go somewhere else for an opportunity, a fight with another fighter, a more interesting fighter than, say, Jose Scatecki. It's not likely that that happens, but what could happen is if things fall apart between Caleb and Canelo, maybe it can be David and Caleb.
They got history.
If the PBC had the audacity to stage a fight like Ruiz versus Areola as a Fox pay-per-view, in all likelihood, they'd try to do the same thing with this, except this is a better fight than that one was, lending further credence to the notion that we might get Canelo versus Golovkin 3 in September as opposed to Canelo versus Plant, per tweet from Ryan O'Hara and his sources. I'm being told that the IBF middleweight titleist Gennady Golovkin is training hard as if he is fighting Canelo Alvarez in September. Canelo versus Plant negotiations are still ongoing as we speak, and who knows what developments might be reported by the time that this video is uploaded. It's possible that Canelo Alvarez makes his decision and the Plant fight is announced, just as easily it's possible that nothing gets announced and this saga continues. Your guess is as good as mine.
Right now.
The PBC has since offered Canelo a one-off, a one-fight deal, no strings attached, to fight Caleb Plant on their side of things. But we know there's always more in the fine print. And even with that, who says that Canelo Alvarez wants to gamble on pay-per-view upsides in today's very unstable pay-per-view market?
Maybe he doesn't.
I feel like this entire situation is unnecessary because the only ones that stand to benefit from Canelo Alvarez crossing over to the PBC side of things are the network executives over there at Fox. It comes as no additional benefit to the boxing fan, no additional benefit to the consumer having this fight on the Fox side of things as opposed to DAZN. And Canelo Alvarez being the A side, Canelo Alvarez being the biggest face, the biggest name in boxing anywhere at or around these weights in this part of the world, this should be a relatively simple matter to reconcile. Caleb Plant, if you want him, go over there and get him. Go over there to DAZN.
Because you ain't the fucking
I
A-side.
mean, leave it to the PBC to turn what are relatively simple matters, simple situations, into haggling and ongoing negotiations. This is all about them being able to charge me and you $80 for the fight, as opposed to us being able to see it as a part of
For less.
our DAZN subscriptions at no additional charge. That's what this is really all about.
The same applies to all those other fights.
You guys thought about this? When it's Terrence Crawford, they want him to cross over to their side of things, otherwise, no fight, because he's the B-side. But when it's Canelo Alvarez, who's the A-side to everybody, from 160 to 175, oh, he's got to cross over too.
But he's the A-side.
Both B-sides and A-sides alike have to be funneled to Al Heyman's island of isolation. Otherwise, fights experience these difficulties, or fights, put simply, don't happen.
That's why Canelo versus Golovkin 3 is a possibility.
A distinct possibility. It's a fight I could see happening at 168 pounds for Canelo Alvarez's 3 world titles and the Ring Magazine belt, as opposed to Golovkin's 1 title, the 1 IBF title that he holds at 160 pounds. I think that Canelo Alvarez, for the most part, is all but done at 160, the middleweight division. I don't see him returning there for this fight. If anything, I see Golovkin moving up, because if he were going to move up for anybody...
Well, it's not going to be just anybody.
We're already seeing reports that the Golovkin people are, in fact, receptive to that fight. Given where Gennady Golovkin is in his career right now, the twilight of it, he's ready to cash out. And whether it's with Canelo Alvarez in September or Ryota Murata, New Year's Eve,
either of them,
Golovkin's got money on his mind. Canelo Alvarez provides more of that money, even in a trilogy, even in a third fight, than most everybody else out there. Comes as no surprise to
anyone, really.
Golovkin's interested in it. DAZN would certainly like to put it on. We know how invested they've been in that fight the last year, 2.5 years. And it's all a question of
Canelo and Caleb,
whether or not things work out between Canelo and Caleb, and whether Al Heyman and Bill Wenger fuck up this fight. Because if they fuck up that fight between Canelo and Caleb, this, in all likelihood, is what's next.
It's a conflict of interest there.
If things don't work out between Canelo Alvarez and Caleb Plant, if the people over there at the PBC fuck up this fight, because this is the biggest fight that Caleb Plant can have. Al Heyman, he's supposed to be Caleb's advisor, right?
Right.
Well, whose best interests does he have in mind if he fucks up this fight, which represents the greatest financial value to Caleb? Does he have Caleb's best interests in mind, or his network affiliates?
Bill Wenger.
People over there at Fox. This fight represents the greatest financial value to the fighter, whether it's on Fox or DAZN. And if it doesn't happen, what does that say about Al Heyman?
What happens if Caleb loses to somebody else for less money than he would have made with Canelo?
Because you had your network affiliates' best interests in mind.
And not his.